This is the second video in a 3-part video series all about taking your first flight. In this video, we're covering everything you need to know about the airport, and we'll even cover the boarding process. Hey, I'm Kimberly, and this is KRod Collective, where I teach you how to travel solo, travel smart, and help you fall in love with Spain. Let's talk about the layout of the airport. The airport typically consists of 3 main areas: terminals, concourses, and gates. Terminals are the main buildings where you have ticket counters, security, restaurants, airport lounges, and more. There can be multiple terminals at an airport, and they each serve different airlines and domestic or international flights. Concourses are large areas within terminals where the gates are located. So for example, you might have Delta Airlines on concourses A, B, and C, and Southwest Airlines on concourses D, E, and F. Gates are the specific areas where you board the plane. So if you've ever seen an aerial view of the airport and you see the planes are parked, they're parked at gates. Each gate is usually identified by a number or a letter or a number and letter. So as I stated in part 1, you can begin checking in for your flight 24 hours before your flight. And when you're checking in, this is basically you telling the airline, hey, I booked this flight, I'm actually gonna be there, so please don't give away my seat. And there are a couple ways that you can check in for your flight. One way is on the airline's website. You'll usually be asked to put in something like your confirmation number or your last name or the airport that you're departing from. Another way is through the airline's app. For me, this is one of the fastest ways because with some of these airlines, you can opt in to their push notifications, and they'll send you a notification when it's time to check in. When you open the app, the check-in process begins. And finally, you can also check in person at the airport. There are 2 ways that you can do this. You can either wait in line and speak to a person directly at the ticket counter. They'll usually ask you for your name and your ID, and then they'll manually check you in right then and there at the counter. Or you can check in at the self-service kiosks that they have. When you get to the airport, above the doors, you'll usually see signs for each airline. And once you're inside, you should see self-serving kiosks in the ticketing area. You can easily check in for your flight on one of those kiosks, and most of the time there are agents there available to help you. If you're checking a bag, this is also really easy to do. You can do this either online, in person, or at the kiosk, just like checking in. They'll usually ask you how many bags you're checking and remind you to take out any electronic items that you might have. Because remember, we talked about this in part 1, there are certain electronic items that you cannot check in the bag to go underneath the plane. You'll also have to get your bag weighed to make sure it's in the weight requirements. If you checked a bag online, you'll need to get it weighed in person before you drop it off. Then you'll get a long slip of paper, and this is called a bag tag that you'll need to attach to your bag. So this slip of paper basically tells the airline, hey, this bag belongs to this person, and they're gonna pick up this bag in their final destination of X. This is pretty easy to attach, but if you need help, there's usually ticketing agents around that can help you put the bag tag on properly. Now, there will be a small slip that comes along with that tag that they're going to give you. Do not lose that slip. You're going to need that slip in case your bag goes missing, it gets onto another plane. This has all of your information on it. So if your bag somehow gets lost, you'll need to give this little slip of paper to the agent in your final destination so they can help you track your bag. So once you get that slip of paper, go ahead and put it in a safe spot just in case you'll need it for the future. Then after you've weighed your luggage, you've got your bag tag on, then they'll usually tell you where to go to drop it off. Or if you're checking in person at the counter, they'll just take the bag from you. If you're not checking a bag, checking in online is so easy. No matter how you check in, they'll ask you a series of questions regarding rules and regulations and what you can and cannot bring on the plane. And once the check-in process is complete, you will get your boarding pass. Now, since this is your first flight, if you do feel more comfortable checking in person once you get to the airport, feel free to do that. Now let's take a second to talk about the boarding pass. This is exactly what it sounds like. This is a ticket, or if your boarding pass is electronic, it's a QR code that you scan to get onto the plane. This is an example of what a boarding pass looks like. So more or less the information that you'll find on a boarding pass are the date, the flight number, the departure airport, so the airport that you're flying out of, the arrival airport, so the airport that you're flying into, the boarding time, the departure time, your name, your boarding group, the gate, and then if it's electronic, your QR code. Remember, the gate is where you board the plane. Every airline displays this differently, but this is more or less the information that you'll see on a typical boarding pass. Without this, you cannot board the plane, so this is a pretty important travel document to have. Now, if you have an electronic boarding pass and you don't think your phone has enough juice to get you from getting to the airport to actually boarding the plane, then I would go ahead and go to the ticket counter to have one printed or print one at home, just in case. If you have an iPhone, you can download your electronic boarding pass into your Apple Wallet. You can also take a screenshot and it'll work just as well. Now that you're checked in and you have your boarding pass, it is time to go through security. Security is usually right by the check-in counters, and if you checked in online and you're not checking a bag, once you get to the airport, you can just head straight to security because you already have your boarding pass. So there are different security lines, so make sure you're reading the signs to know which line you should be getting in. And there's also usually airport staff there that will look at your boarding pass and direct you to the right line. So security is fairly simple. You'll wait in line and then you'll be called up to see a TSA officer. And here they'll ask to see your boarding pass and your ID. Most of the time, there's an electronic scanner that you will scan your boarding pass, either electronic or your physical boarding pass. And then usually you'll hand the TSA officer your ID. Now, remember what we said in part 1, if you're traveling domestically, so within your own country, you'll usually need to show a valid form of identification. That could be a state ID, a military ID, passport card. If you are in the US and you're using a state ID as your identification, it does need to be a real ID. So if you're not sure what that is and you want to learn about that, there will be information in the video that is linked above in the cards and down in the description box. If this is an international flight, you must show your ID and scan your boarding pass. Now, once your ID and your boarding pass are checked, then the officer will usher you to proceed through security. Now, there are a few important things to know about airport security. One important thing is that you cannot bring any liquids that are over 3.4 ounces. Another important thing is that TSA now has a new policy where you do not have to remove your shoes when you're going through domestic security in the US. If you're curious about other things that you should know or crucial mistakes that you don't want to make when going through TSA security, then definitely check out this video right here. Now, once you approach the actual security, right by the conveyor belts, there should be some large bins. This is where you'll put your bags and other belongings to go through the security scanner. You're going to have to empty out your pockets and also put any large electronic items that are larger than a phone in the bins. Although you don't have to take off your shoes anymore, if you do have a shoe that might be problematic going through security, they may ask you to take those shoes off. So it all depends. Now, each airport does conduct airport security a little bit differently regarding the bins and what goes inside versus what doesn't go inside. So make sure you're watching the people in front of you. And also, if you have any doubts or questions, go ahead and ask the officers. And most of the time, you'll figure it out when you get there. If you're loving this video so far and you're finding it helpful and you would love more travel tips, definitely make sure to like this video and subscribe to this channel. If you're traveling internationally, you will have to go through customs and immigration. Every country does it differently, and how strict they are all depends on that individual country's rules, security protocols, and the agreements that they may have with other countries. So during immigration, that country's government checks you, your passport, your visa, if you have any, and your legal right to enter that country. Now, this usually happens after you land or before you depart, depending on the country. Now, you might be asked things like, why are you visiting? How long are you staying? Where are you staying? And then once you're approved, they'll usually stamp your passport. Some areas have border-free agreements, like the Schengen zone in Europe, for example, which makes it a bit easier for travelers to move freely between those zones. So, for example, if you're doing a Europe trip and you're traveling from the US to Spain to France to Italy, you would go through immigration once you reach Spain from the US, but you wouldn't go through it when you're going from Spain to France or from France to Italy, because that would be like flying from New York to LA, except LA is a different country. Again, if you're living in the US and you're traveling internationally, when you come back into the US, you'll have to go through security and passport control, which is immigration. So customs is about your stuff, the items that you're bringing across the border. Now, this normally happens after baggage claim before you leave the airport. Customs officers generally want to know things like, are you bringing in restricted or prohibited goods? Are you carrying large amounts of cash? And are you importing high-value items like certain food products, certain alcohols, tobacco, things like that? Now, declaring an item is basically you telling customs, hey, I am bringing this item into the country. Most countries have moved from physical customs forms to digital custom forms. But there are a few countries that still do the paper forms that are floating around. And they'll usually hand that out to you on the flight closer towards landing. And you'll fill out things like your address, the address of where you're staying, and any items that you're bringing in that you would like to declare. If there is no physical form, then you'll just verbalize what you're bringing in to the customs officer. Now, once you're through security, you'll want to find your gate. There will be large screens throughout the airport that will have departure information for various flights. Now, I would suggest double checking those screens and cross-referencing them to what you have on your boarding pass, because gate information is one of the most likely things to change. This is where having the airline's app becomes really useful, because you can also opt into those notifications that will notify you if your gate changes, and you can also refresh the app pretty quickly to see if your gate has changed. But some smaller airports, it's really easy to just simply walk to your gate. At larger airports, you might need to take a shuttle bus or a shuttle train to get to your gate. Now, once you've found the general area of your gate, you can use the bathroom, grab some food, chill, do whatever you want until it's time to board. So here's a little pro tip about charging your phone at the airport. Do not use the USB charging ports that are there. Always use your brick. I don't know exactly what the formal word for this is, but I call this the brick. So use this to charge your phone at the airport. Do not use the USB charging ports, because if you do, you are at risk of something called juice jacking. Now, since I am not the most technically savvy person, I'm going to read you something online about what juice jacking is. Juice jacking is when hackers install malware and data theft software on public USB charging stations. So when you plug your phone in, that USB connection doesn't just carry power, it also transmits data. So I will leave that at that. I will also link some crucial information down in the description box below if you want to learn more about juice jacking. You know, I've said it before, but there are a lot of scams and crimes that are centered and targeted around the airport, around international travel, just travel in general. So I just want to make you aware of that. Again, I'll link information down in the description box if you want to learn more about that. So let's quickly touch on the boarding process. Now, on your boarding pass, there should be a departure time. Now, this is the time where the plane is scheduled to push back from the gate and actually leave. So the door should be closed at that time. And then there should also be a boarding time on your boarding pass. And that is the time that boarding usually begins. Now, depending on the airline and on whether this is a domestic or an international flight, boarding could take anywhere between 30 and 60 minutes. Boarding is usually done in groups or zones, and your group or zone should be on your boarding pass. Now, sometimes they'll put up signs on the gate and it'll say, you know, zone 1 through 2 or zone 2 through 4 or whatever, and you will line up according to whatever group you're in. And other times you'll just be hanging out by the gate and the gate agent will announce which zone is boarding. And once your group is called, you're good to board the plane. Now, depending on the airport and on the airline, for some flights, you will walk down something called a jet bridge to get to the plane. And then at others, you may have to take a van, a bus, or walk outside to get onto the plane. That happens a lot in some countries in Europe and also in the Caribbean. And it also happens sometimes at smaller airports in the US. It all depends on the airport, the airline, and how much space they have. Now, as I stated in part 1, most airlines will allow you to have 2 bags. If you have more than 2 bags, you may need to consolidate before you board. Now, in some places, depending on the country, the airline, you may board the plane from front to back. And then in other countries, other airlines, you will board the plane from the front and the back simultaneously. Again, it all depends. If this is a domestic or international flight, they usually will close the boarding door 10 to 15 minutes before departure. So you'll want to make sure you're at the airport at your gate well before that time, because if not, the airline does have the right to give your seat away, and you won't be able to board the plane once those doors are shut. So remember, departure time does not equal boarding time. Okay, now there's one small thing that I do want to touch on, especially for my international travelers, and that is duty free. So every country has taxes, right? And they're usually incorporated into the price of an item, or they are added on to the price at checkout. about. There is a thing called customs duty, which is a tax on goods when transported across international borders. So this tax is to essentially protect that country's economy. Now, when you're leaving an international destination to come back to your home country or to go to another country, there will be stores in the airport where you could buy things like bottles of alcohol, perfume, luxury goods, chocolates, and many more things. And some of these things are usually high tax items, so you can buy them at the airport tax-free. Now, duty-free doesn't always necessarily mean cheaper, it just means tax-free, basically. Now, most countries do have a duty-free allowance, but I'm not really gonna get into all of that right now. I'm pretty sure it's a high amount. Unless you're doing something like sourcing products outside of the country for wholesale, for like a store or something like that, then it's not really something you're most likely going to need to worry about. But if you do want more information on that, check the description box below. In the next video, I'll be talking about everything you need to know for your actual flight. But if you are interested in what you need to know before your flight, definitely check out part 1 of this series right here. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.